Hello and welcome to What's Happening to My Body. Over the past few episodes, we talk a lot about the physical side of women's health, hormones, stress, fatigue, cravings, and metabolism. But today we're zooming out and talking about something that sits underneath all of that, your relationship with food. Because for so many women, the challenge isn't just what to eat, is how they feel around food. The guilt after eating something off plan, the constant second guessing, the feeling of being either very in control or completely out of control. And if you've ever felt like food takes up way too much space in your brain, this episode is especially for you.
Yes, 100%. This is a conversation very, very close to both of our hearts because we worked with hundreds of women who are genuinely trying to improve their health, but they're doing it from a place of pressure, fear, or past diet trauma. And when your relationship with food feels tense or stressful, even the most perfect nutrition plan becomes hard to sustain. So, today we do want to talk about how to work on your health while also healing your relationship with food because the two should never be in conflict. So, the first thing we want to touch on is diet trauma and food guilt. So, one of the most important things to acknowledge is that many women are not starting from a neutral place with food. They're starting from years, sometimes decades of dieting, restriction, food rules, and messaging that taught that their body needs to be controlled. Now, over time, this can create what we often call diet trauma. And while that might sound like a strong term, the nervous system really does remember repeated cycles of restriction, guilt, and pressure. So we often see patterns like all or nothing mentality, feeling good or bad about food, and based on also what you have eaten, fear of certain food groups, feeling out of control around foods that were previously restricted. And obviously, these are all learned responses, not actual personal failures.
Yes, Kat. And the tricky part is that many women don't even realize how much the history is still shaping their behavior because diet culture has been so normalized. You might
Yeah.
think you're just being disciplined when actually your nervous system is still reacting to years of food stress. And guilt here plays a huge role. Like talking about guilt after eating, guilt for feeling hungry, guilt for resting, guilt for not being perfect. But guilt doesn't create sustainable change and creates only tension. And tension almost always backfires around food. And
Yes,
one
agreed.
of the biggest shifts, yeah, and one of the biggest shifts we work on with women is moving towards shame-free nutrition. And what that means is removing morality from food. So let's think about this. Food is not good or bad, and you're not good or bad based on what you ate today. When we attach more weight to eating, the nervous system stays in a constant state of pressure. And pressure around food almost always increases preoccupation and emotional eating.
Yes, and all of those points are so, so valid because from a behavioral science perspective, shame is actually a very good long term motivator. It might create a short burst of control and motivation, but it increases stress hormones, reduces self trust, and often leads to rebound behaviors. So, oftentimes, compassion is actually the best way to go because it supports regulation. So, when women feel safe around food, when eating is not loaded with fear and shame, consistency becomes much more achievable. And consistency is what actually drives health outcomes and results over time. Now,
Well
one
said.
of the good things about what we're talking today is we want to really give you an insight on why compassion leads to consistency. because there's a common fear that if women become more compassionate with themselves, they'll lose progress and motivation. But clinically, we actually the reality is completely the opposite. When the nervous system feels safer, eating becomes more regulated, hunger becomes clearer, fullness cues become easier to notice, and cravings also often feel less urgent. And all of this is because the body's no longer in that push pull or fight or flight survival pattern.
Yeah, and also I think that compassion doesn't mean not caring about your health, but it means removing the constant internal battle when you're not fighting yourself all day. You actually have more capacity to follow through on supportive habits. And this is where we start to see women move from short bursts of perfection into long term steadiness.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, and something really important, it's like healing your relationship with food does not mean having no structure at all. Like, structure can be incredibly supportive. And I'm talking about regular meals, balanced plates, planning ahead, and these are stabilizing for the body. And what we want to avoid is rigid fear based control.
Yes, so we often describe this as the difference between supportive structure and obsessive structure. So, supportive structure feels calm, flexible, and sustainable, while obsessive structure or control feels tight, stressful, and it often leads to that all or nothing mindset. So, if missing one perfect meal sends you into a spiral, that's actually usually the sign that the system is too rigid. And the goal is
Yeah,
always consistency, not perfection. So,
yeah.
how do we focus on eating to nourish and not to control? We have to remember that at the core of all of this is a big mindset shift. So, moving from eating to control your body towards eating to nourish and support it, it's important because when food becomes purely about control, calories, number, restriction, the body often feels almost like under threat. But when food is consistently providing energy, protein, fiber, satisfaction, happiness, the body tends to regulate much more smoothly and consistently.
Yeah, you're perfectly right here. And this doesn't mean ignoring your goals. You can absolutely care about health, body composition, energy, and feeling strong in your body. But the path that tends to work best long term is the one that includes nourishment, flexibility, and self trust.
Yes.
And guys, if this episode resonated, we want to leave you with some very practical starting points you can try this week. For example, we have tip number one: notice your food language. Start paying attention to how you speak to yourself about food. If you catch yourself saying, I was bad today, or I blew it, gently practice neutral language instead. For example, I ate more than I planned, and that's information. That's it.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Now, a second tip that I want to give is build gentle meal structure. Now, what I mean with that is aim for regular meals across the day rather than having long gaps
Yeah.
followed by intense hunger. Because a simple starting point is three meals, each containing protein, carbohydrates, and fats. And this supports your blood sugar stability and reduces the intensity of those evening cravings as well.
Yeah, that's a great one. And add before you remove. This is step number three. Before cutting foods out, ask, what could I add to make this meal more nourishing? Often adding protein, fiber, or color improves satiety far more than restriction.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Now, tip number four, I would say, is create a pause, not a rule. Now, if emotional eating shows up, I always say to my clients, find your anchor. And what I mean by that is try to step away and check in before acting. So, not to just stop yourself from eating, but just to notice, am I hungry, tired, or overwhelmed, or needing comfort? Or am I actually hungry? So we want to create that awareness that build regulation over time.
This was a great one. This was very, very important. Please listen very carefully and maybe write down these tips. And let's go with tip number 5. So, practice permission based eating. What does this mean? Give yourself realistic permission to include enjoyable foods regularly rather than placing them on a pedestal. When foods are no longer forbidden, their emotional charge often decrease.
Yes. And most importantly, be patient with yourself. Obviously, with the tips we have given you, we don't want you to, do all of them at once. Choose one tip
Mm.
that you relate the most and you might find the most helpful, and try and just be curious with them and try to be a little bit more aware. Remember that your relation with food was built over years. So healing will be a gradual progress and process as well.
Yeah, of course. And if this episode felt supportive or eye opening, we're really glad to hear this. And you deserve to work on your health without feeling like you're constantly at war with food.
Yes, 100%. And this is a topic then, as we said at the start, we're both very passionate because also we had our own struggles with our relation with food when we first started in the industry. So it is very close to our heart. And we are always also very happy to have conversation about it. So feel free to follow us on our social media at NutriFit Project. We also answer DMs there. So if you have any questions, feel free to send us a DM. But also don't forget to follow our Instagram as well for our podcast, which is at what's happening to my body dot the podcast. And then you can also follow us on Spotify. We hope this episode has resonated. And of course, as always, share it with someone who may need to hear as well.
Thank you for being here and see you next week. Bye.
Bye.